This is lesson 5.7 in elementary algebra. It's called solving equations by factoring. We'll call it 5.7a. I'm sure there'll be another one. Alright, we just did a lesson 5.6 on doing factoring. Alright, we did not solve for x, we didn't solve for y, we just made things look nicer, tidier. Well, in this lesson we're actually going to go ahead and solve for the variable. Okay, so here we go. We will start off with the first equation and just go from there. So we have 2, let me get my pen working, minus 5x equals 12. Okay, first thing we want to do is set this equal to 0. So we're going to have to take anything on the right hand side and move it over here. So how do we take a number and move it over? Well, it's a plus 12, so we subtract 12 from both sides. Yay, now we get it equal to 0. Okay, now we look at this and we factor it. So I'm going to take 2 times 12 and get negative 24. So I'm looking for two numbers multiplied together give me negative 24, added together give me a negative 5. That ends up being 8 and 3. Well, 8 times 3 is positive 24. I need a negative, so one of those numbers has to be negative. So a negative times a positive gives me a negative. But which one? Well, this is a negative sign. When I add these together, I need to get a negative 5. So that means the largest number will always take on this sign here. So I'm going to go ahead and make my parentheses. Well, let's not make the parentheses yet. Let's write it as 2x squared minus, now instead of that, okay, so there's my equation. Notice I've got my plus right there in the middle where I want it. Now I'm going to group. I can factor out a 2 and an x there, and I'm left with an x minus 4. Because 2x times 4 is going to give me my negative 8x back. And what can I factor out of there? A 3. And I'm left with x minus 4. This and this have to be the same. Then I can take my numbers that are outside and this and write it once. And don't forget my equals 0 that I have from right here. Okay, so I've got that. So how do I find x? Alright, this is the part that people get a little confused with, but if I'm going to multiply two numbers together, let's say I'm going to multiply whatever's in here times whatever is in here, I'm going to get an answer. But if my answer is 0, that means one of these numbers has to be 0. So for instance, x minus 4 has to be, if that's 0, that means x has to be what? 4. So if I put a 4 in here, then 4 minus 4 is 0. I don't care what's over here. If this is 0, anything that I multiply times this is going to give me 0. So x is 4, and that's going to make that a true statement. So let's, I can't just get rid of stuff. Let's use some green here. So 2x plus 3, that could be 0. So 2x plus 3 equals 0. Okay, so if this comes together and gives me 0, and I multiply it by this number, whatever it is, I should get 0. So what number does x have to be in order to make that happen? Well, I've got 2x plus 3 equals 0, so I subtract 3 from both sides, and then I divide by 2, and x equals negative 3 halves. So I get two answers. I get 4, and I get negative 3 halves. Either one of those numbers works, so x equals 4 or negative 3 halves. Those are my options for x. That's my solution. That either one of those numbers will make this a true statement. Okay, so again, so much of this is just trying examples, just watching what happens and practicing. Okay, so I've got two terms. I have a minus sign between them. Can I take the square root of that? Can I take the square root of that? Square root of this, square root of that, put a parenthesis there, make another one, put a parenthesis, equals 0, plus, minus. Doesn't matter which one's plus, which one's minus, because they're both the same. So one of these has to be equal to 0. So let's write the first one equal to 0. And let's write the second one equal to 0. Okay, so let's solve that. Add 5 to both sides. Divide by 4. A equals 5 over 4. Over here, subtract 5 from both sides. Divide by 4. So there's my two values of A. Okay? So that's example number 2. Let's jump up to example 3. And example 3 is 4x squared equals 8x. Alright, we're going to set it equal to 0. Again, everything gets set equal to 0, so we move the 8 to the other side by subtracting it from both sides, and we get that. We factor out what we can. We can factor out a 4, left with an x minus 2. Okay, so this is kind of an interesting arrangement here. I've got an x here and an x here, so I have to set this equal to 0 and this equal to 0. So let's try that. 4x equals 0 and x minus 2 equals 0. So when this is true, divide by 4, x equals 0 over 4, or 0. X equals 2. So there are my two answers there. So that's example 3. And again, this is a constant reminder that you're just trying to remember a whole bunch of stuff. So just keep going back to your notes as you're taking them here, and be able to refer to them as you're trying to do these problems. Okay, so right there we've already got something pretty much factored, but we're trying to solve it. So that's when we distribute. X times 2x is 2x squared plus 3x equals 44. We move that to the other side. Okay. Now, we take, again, because that number is not 1, we multiply it by that. I get negative 88. So I'm looking for two numbers that multiply to give me negative 88, add to give me 3. So I know those two numbers have to be pretty close together in order for me to get the difference of those and get 3. So like 22 and 4 is not going to work, but 11 and 8 would work, right? And let's see, I need to get a negative 88, so one's a positive and one's a negative, and I know this one's the positive because it's the biggest one, and that sign is positive. Alright, so I've got 2x squared, and instead of writing this, I'm going to put these two together. Okay, notice I switched these around because this middle one needs to be the plus sign. So I'm going to look at these, factor out what I can. Look at these, factor out what I can. And these will always be the same. So I have 2x plus 11 times x minus 4. The screen isn't real easy to see. I'm going to have to change colors. So then I write 2x plus 11 equals 0, and x minus 4 equals 0. So over here, subtract 11 from both sides, divide by 2, x is negative 11 halves, and x is 4. Those are my two answers there. Okay, so let's look at example 5 and then 6, and then we'll be done. So we'll do that on the next video.